Ibu Profesor Kathryn. Prof. Kathryn, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Oke, terima kasih banyak Bu Kathryn berkenan bergabung. Saya akan lebih senang jika menyapa Anda dalam bahasa Indonesia, Bu Kathryn.
Very little.
Karena saya tahu Anda bisa berbahasa Indonesia dengan baik. Ya. Jadi Ibu Kathryn untuk para peserta webinar, salah satu karya monumentalnya adalah salah satu seri dari buku ekologi. Jadi kalau misalnya kita pernah membaca ada buku ekologi Sumatera, ekologi Kalimantan, ekologi Jawa Bali, ekologi Wallacea, ekologi Papua, ekologi Nusa Tenggara. Nah, Ibu Kathryn adalah salah satu penulis untuk seri buku ekologi tersebut. Ibu Kathryn menghabiskan waktunya lebih dari 18 tahun untuk bercerita tentang hal-hal terkait lingkungan di Asia Tenggara. Walaupun dia, kalau saya tidak salah, bachelor Anda untuk insek ekologi. Is that okay, Bu Kathryn? Your bachelor degree is for insect ecology. Interesting, because in Andalas University we have a good collection of a lot of butterflies, and also recently the Dinas Kehutanan in West Sumatra sort of program perhutanan sosial promote the using of the stingless bees. So ada perhutanan sosial di Sumatera Barat sekarang ada program untuk membudidayakan stingless bees, dan ini menjadi salah satu bentuk ekonomi alternatif yang sangat mendukung kesuksesan dari program perhutanan sosial tersebut. So today we would like to ask you to share your vision regarding the global perspective on restoration ecosystem. So the floor is yours, Ibu, please.
Akan ditayangkan dari Pakuan, Pak Wilson.
Oke,
Pak Tri, silakan Pak Tri.
Minta tolong Pak Tri.
Lovely, thank you very much. So, selamat siang Bapak Ibu, terima kasih banyak untuk undangan berbicara hari ini, Hari Lingkungan Hidup, tentang restorasi ekosistem. Saya mohon maaf, tapi I'm going to speak in English again. Eventually, I hope my Indonesian will come back to a good standard, but I'm hoping your English quite often is much better than my Indonesian. So Dolly's going to help me if I can have the next slide. Okay. So I am really honoured to have been asked to contribute to this seminar to celebrate World Environment Day today. This day is truly a global event overseen by the United Nations, UNEP in particular, in its 49th year, hosted by Pakistan, and its theme, Ecosystem Restoration, launches the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. Next slide. Thank you. I really like this strapline that is going to be used over the next decade, and we should all get to learn this. Reimagine, recreate, restore. This message about restoration is for everybody, from politicians to children, to businessmen to farmers. And it's from the very small scale to the enormous challenges of recreating large-scale landscapes, as you have in Indonesia. Next slide. You're all familiar, I'm sure, with the definition of ecosystem restoration. But this activity occurs alongside other conservation and protection programs to extend or rehabilitate the ecosystems and landscapes. Rewilding is an interesting comparison we might discuss later on, which is not active intervention, but very passive stepping back, and may be an area that we look at in more detail over the next decade to cope with the enormous scale landscape restoration that is needed. This appreciation of our dependency on nature has radically increased over the past few years, because we are now seeing the extreme events predicted and associated with climate change, and especially in this past COVID-19 year, where we've recognised our health and well-being is intimately dependent on the environment, on the ecosystem services the environment provides, and that our economies and our very way of life is threatened by the nature crisis, the loss of biodiversity, and the climate emergency. And this emerges from our continued unsustainable production and consumption lifestyle. So ecosystem restoration is increasingly important in conservation and unsustainable development programs. Next slide. Ecological or ecosystem restoration is not new. We have the Society for Ecological Restoration, founded in 1988, whose mission is to advance the science, practice and policy of ecological restoration to sustain biodiversity, improve resilience to a changing climate, and re-establish an ecologically healthy relationship between nature and culture. It is a global community of restoration professionals, including researchers, practitioners, decision makers, and community leaders. They promote the international principles and standards for the practice of ecological restoration. And as these 8 principles here highlight, restoration is an amalgamation of many disciplines, from social and economic sciences to highly focused silvicultural and engineering methods, all needing to be embedded in an appropriate supporting framework of policies and regulations. Next slide. Another relevant global network and resource for everyone is the Ecosystem Restoration Thematic Group of IUCN's Commission on Ecosystem Management, and they have a monthly webinar series, and you will see that their latest video is on integrating bioenergy and landscape restorations, lessons from Indonesia. You have a lot to teach the rest of the world, and this is one good way of sharing that knowledge and expertise. Next slide. Going back specifically to today, to World Environment Day, its first pre-launch event that some of you may have joined was last Tuesday on the 1st of June, with the new forest landscape restoration theme of the global network Panorama. Panorama was set up in 2016 as a partnership initiative to document and promote examples of inspiring, replicable solutions from a range of conservation and sustainable development topics, enabling cross-sectorial learning and inspiration. Panorama allows conservation and development practitioners to share their stories, gain recognition for their work, and learn and be inspired by how others have tackled challenges across the globe. Next slide. The online platform allows all types of users to find specific examples of successful approaches, broken down into their core building blocks, and it has powerful search and classification functionalities that help you quickly find relevant solutions across themes, geographies, and ecosystems. Replicating what works is absolutely the key, and what we heard in the previous presentation were so many examples that really need to be shared much more widely, globally. Next slide. Panorama, thank you. Panorama brigade these examples across a number of themes, and this slide shows a range of projects going on, contributing to learning from each other in the ecosystems-based adaptation theme. And although it's tiny, you can see there are examples from places such as from Brazil to Sweden to an Indonesian example of one of the mangrove restoration programs, as we heard earlier from Pat. The themes can be intimately linked, and you can search across all the projects on Panorama on a filter to find the one that can help with a specific need situation you're facing, be it a practical village level or a policy framework. And we could upload so many more examples from Indonesia and share your expertise. Next slide. So these are examples of projects already registered specifically in the forest landscape theme, and it shows including the Cedar Nature Reserve in the Lebanon, and I've included the video link for you to follow later, which shows the work the local communities are doing there to grow seedlings and replant the forests with native trees. And it makes an interesting comparison to many of the replanting projects that you have here in Indonesia. And we recognise, of course, all of us, I'm sure, that behind all these projects is a wealth of forestry, silviculture and soil microbiology research that needs adapting for practical use by these community partners in each individual situation. Next slide. The main message is that ecosystem restoration, of course, has a global focus, is being undertaken around the world by many different partners, and that in effect it is nothing new. I thought you might be interested, therefore, to examine an example from Burkina Faso in Africa that was supported by IUCN a decade ago and involved a colleague of mine, Dr. Jill Shepherd. Some of you may actually know her. She's worked a lot in Indonesia as well. Next slide. The Sablogo forest is, of course, nothing like most of your forests, although in the driest eastern Indonesian islands, some landscapes and problems are similar. In essence, the main problem is very familiar to all of us. The forest supplied multiple benefits, ecosystem services, for a growing population of people, and in this case, their cattle. And it became obvious that overexploitation could not continue. Next slide. Like virtually all ecosystem restoration projects, the solutions needed coalitions to form, partnerships and trust across different stakeholders who were separated by knowledge and power structures. Next slide. But here, as their solution was, as in many situations that will be familiar to you, was to develop a spatially plan a controlled exploitation of the whole system with core and buffer zones. Next slide. But that had to be supported absolutely by institutional evolution and support to manage and evaluate those new approaches. This was all set up 10 years ago in Sablogo and continues today. Today, what is really new is the global swell in political and social recognition that restoring ecosystems is no longer the prerogative of the conservation or the forestry communities, but is something that is vital for everyone in every corner of the world to engage with. Next slide. So let's have a look at another ecosystem that is the focal of global restoration and will be, of course, incredibly familiar to yourselves, the peat lilies. And I highlight here those in Indonesia on this map and in Wales as a complete contrast. Next slide. So you know better than I of the massive peatland restoration programs in Indonesia, particularly, of course, in Sumatra and Kalimantan, and the international attention that these attract because of their multiple ecosystem services to local, national and international communities, especially at this time of such massive global attention on climate emergency and the need for increased carbon sequestration. You have a spectacularly short timeline planned for such an enormous programme. And I'd like to flag here the issue of rewilding, which is emerging as a global discussion and action in relation to restoration, which is really important here. rewilding, the absence of active intervention, but the stepping away from habitats that need to be restored, is a really interesting one for everyone, but I think particularly here in Indonesia with the scale we deal with. Next slide. Wales, a country just the size of the Leuser ecosystem in Sumatra, has also a national programme for peatland restoration. It's led by the Welsh Government agency Natural Resources Wales, of which I was the science advisor for many years until my retirement at the end of April. Next slide. Wales has a 5-year National Peatland Action Plan for a very small area compared with what you have in Indonesia. And it was launched by the Wales Environment Minister last November. They recognised the tight connections between the nature crisis and the climate change emergency, because peatland condition has a major bearing on greenhouse gas emissions. Here for Wales, you see the left-hand pie chart shows the broad condition components of Welsh peatland. Near natural, we have very little absolutely natural pristine habitat in Wales. Semi-natural, and then highly modified by people. The right-hand pie chart shows their net carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gas emissions. And the key messages here were that restoring all Wales's semi-natural bog habitat to near-natural condition could reduce our emissions by 25%, and that 1/3 of the peatlands, i.e. modified and damaged, accounts for almost 3/4 of those total emissions that Wales is responsible for. Next slide. The programme has priority action themes and a range of sites. About 90,000 hectares of deep peat occurs in Wales. Obviously not anything like the scale of challenge that you face in Indonesia, but hopefully it's interesting and important nonetheless. Next slide. This shows the landscape area called Clywem in Powys in central Wales as an example of a 2020 project in what we consider in Wales a difficult to do context. We think of this as large scale, and the 3 excavators that we used are shown in circle, realigning eroded areas and blocking drainage ditches. There was an immediate effect on water retention, which is the insert here, increasing biodiversity and slowing the flow of water, reducing potential for flooding downstreams and improving water quality, reducing the need also for costly water purification treatment. It demonstrates the flexibility and utility of legislation that set up my agency and allowed a land management agreement mechanism to come out of something called the Environment Wales Act of 2016. The site is managed jointly by the agency and Welsh Water, which is a not-for-profit water company in Wales. And a principal function of this estate that the water company owns is the provision of a clean water supply. This means the whole area is supposed to be managed in an environmentally friendly way to protect the water quality. The scale of this project compared to your programmes highlights the issues that I mentioned of the large-scale restoration and the use of rewilding, and it's something that even Wales is going to have to think about. Next slide. So back to global coordination and support for ecosystem restoration, and to Indonesia as the host for the Centre for International Forestry Research, C4, which leads the Global Landscapes Forum in collaboration with its co-founders UNEP and the World Bank. Its headquarters, as you all, I'm sure, are highly familiar, are in Bogor, but they have offices in Kenya, Cameroon, Peru and Germany. It's such an amazing resource of interdisciplinary research and expertise on all things forests, and particularly ecosystem restoration. And it too recognises the enormous challenge and opportunity of land restoration. Next slide. So as custodians of some of the most amazing natural resources in the world, on land and in the sea, and with such global partnerships within country and accessible elsewhere, I look forward to seeing Indonesia take a leading position in the UN's decade of ecosystem restoration, of sharing the expertise and those examples of ecological restoration that you are already involved in. And I thank you for allowing me to celebrate World Environment Day and the start of the decade of ecosystem restoration. Thank you.
Terima kasih. Thank you very much. Prof. Kathryn, this nice presentation, very concise, compact, and straight to the point. We need something like that. So we are ready for action. Bapak dan Ibu, baru saja kalau tadi Pak Mirano cerita kepada kita tentang bagaimana kegiatan yang telah dilakukan terkait restorasi ekosistem di negara kita. Baru saja Kathryn bercerita tentang bagaimana konsep kegiatan restorasi ekosistem, kemudian beberapa contoh yang pernah dilakukan, dan kemudian juga pentingnya. Salah satu yang kami catat adalah pentingnya bagaimana kita melakukan koalisi ataupun kerja aksi bersama untuk melakukan restorasi ekosistem ini. Tadi kita dimention oleh Pak Wir bahwasanya beliau mempunyai keterbatasan waktu. Untuk itu kita langsung saja, Pak Wir, izin ada 3 pertanyaan untuk Bapak. Yang pertama itu dari Pak Abdul Rahman, ini terkait bagaimana caranya kita yang misalkan di kota itu untuk ikut berperan serta dalam kegiatan restorasi ekosistem.
Iya. Udah tak jawab di chat, nanti hubungi saya. Saya udah nulis nomor di chat, disebarkan. Kebiasaan saya membagi nomor HP, lalu nanti saya teman-teman yang di Bogor bisa membantu Gunung Gede sama Gunung Halimun Salak, ada program-program kemitraan konservasi dengan masyarakat dan ada program menanam. Bu Kathryn, thank you very much for your presentation. It's my honor. I invite Bu Kathryn to visit back to Indonesia someday.
Oh, I would very much like to.
Thank you. Keep contact with me. Itu Mas Abdul sudah ya kasih. Tadi bagus sekali, dia berminat, saya kira. Dan saya kira di mana-mana boleh link up to local national park, bisa. Nah, ada lagi.
Mungkin kita bisa bikin sahabat taman nasional ya, Pak ya?
Ya, boleh, silakan. Dimulai dari Universitas Pakuan dan ini, Mas Doli dan Andalas ya, saya kira. Silakan.
Ya, Pak Dirjen, insya Allah.
Kemudian yang kedua ada pertanyaan dari Pak Alfitri, Pak. Jadi pertanyaan beliau ini mungkin terkesan dengan apa yang Bapak lakukan di Lauser, dan pertanyaan beliau adalah bagaimana Kiat membangkitkan partisipasi masyarakat yang sebelumnya ikut dalam illegal logging, justru sebaliknya sekarang berperan serta dalam melakukan pengelolaan kawasan. Apa kiat-kiat untuk membangkitkan itu, Pak? Itu pertanyaan kedua dari Pak Alfitri, Pak.
Pak Alfitri, saya kira kita harus dekat dengan masyarakat. Penyakitnya birokrat itu kan dia merasa lebih tinggi, lebih pintar gitu ya. Kalau saya, Pak Bali, teman-teman semua, Pak Wilson, Bu Kathryn, kita harus turun ke masyarakat. Turun, ngapain turun itu? Turun itu adalah kita mendengarkan aspirasi masyarakat itu, kita melihat ladangnya, kebunnya seperti apa, problem ekonominya kayak apa, lalu ketergantungannya kepada hutan itu apa sebetulnya. Jadi kita urus dulu, menurut mereka itu masalah, lalu solusi menurut mereka apa. Jadi itu yang saya sebut sebagai memanusiakan manusia, menempatkan masyarakat, pengurutan sebagai subjek. Adalah kita mendengarkan dan mencari solusi cerdas dari persoalan konkret yang dihadapi masyarakat pinggir hutan itu. Itu menurut saya yang paling manjur, dan tidak boleh dengan masyarakat itu basa-basi gitu ya. Telling the truth gitu, kalau janji harus ditepati. Dan yang penting bukan berjanji aja, adalah mencari merumuskan masalah-masalah secara bersama. Saya kira menebang pohon bagi kita itu masalah, masyarakat yang menebang pohon. Mungkin bagi masyarakat itu solusi dari kemiskinannya. Dua sisi pandang yang berbeda, oleh karena itu kita harus bisa sama-sama. Itu lama ditangkal itu, dan banyak tokoh-tokoh juga di sana yang dulu pakai ilmu klenik itu kan saling menyerang di antara masyarakat itu. Dan sejarah itu saya tulis di buku Tersesat di Jalan yang Benar, kalau tertarik. ada elektroniknya, nanti kita kirimkan Mas Wilson. Buku saya bagikan gratis, kecuali yang pengen beli di Shopee bisa, yang wisata intelektual. Tapi semuanya e-book sekarang saya bagikan gratis.
Oke, siap. Terima kasih banyak, Pak. Satu lagi, Pak, izin masih ada satu pertanyaan lagi untuk Bapak.
Iya.
Dari Pak Sukimin di Lampung terkait adanya potensi geotermal di dalam kawasan Taman Nasional Bukit Barisan Selatan. Kira-kira apa solusi ataupun arahan yang bisa Bapak berikan supaya masyarakat tetap bisa memanfaatkan potensi geotermal tersebut sekaligus tetap menjaga kelestarian TNBBS. Mungkin itu pertanyaan dari Pak Sukimin, Pak.
Iya, makasih Pak Sukimin. Staf saya mungkin ini ya. Geotermal itu energi bersih sebetulnya. Memang di tahap eksplorasi akan ada membuka dan seterusnya. Tapi dia tidak memerlukan lahan yang luas. Ya, teman-teman masyarakat di sana diyakinkan bahwa itu tidak berbahaya, kan banyak sekali di Bali ditolak itu. Masyarakat Bali nggak mau geotermal. Memang dia bukan tambang, dia dibor memang. Boringnya bisa sampai 2 km Pak Wilson, ke perut bumi di bawah sana jauh. Ya, tapi sebelum eksplorasi kan ada uji apa macam-macam radio dan segala macam ya, geologi. Dan yang paling penting sebetulnya untuk eksplorasi atau eksploitasi geotermal itu adalah menyampaikan kepada masyarakat, sekali lagi telling the truth tadi. What is the impact? What is the possible negative or positive impact dari geothermal exploration? We are talking about geothermal, Ibu Kathryn. In the park we have a potensi for that. Ya, jadi yang penting itu, dan yang sudah jalan adalah di CA Kamojang, dulu boleh di Cagar Alam, kemudian di Taman Nasional di Gunung Halimunsalak itu ada juga. Jadi sebetulnya yang penting adalah menjelaskan betul-betul tentang before, during, dan after exploitation itu ya. Dan dampaknya saya lihat positif. Ya, hutannya terjaga, mereka mendukung masyarakat. Dan yang terutama kepala balainya dan dirjennya juga harus memastikan bahwa itu tidak merugikan dan berdampak negatif pada masyarakat. Itu yang paling penting menurut saya. Potensi ada di Suwoh ya, di Suwoh dan di Kerinci ada juga. Dan itu daripada batu bara mending daripada minyak dan batu bara, saya kira itu the green energy kita punya banyak sekali. Yang baru dikembangkan baru sedikit sekarang. Ini yang tapi memang mahal itu eksplorasinya, mahal sekali. 5 penanya nanti saya harus live. 5 penanya dapat buku saya. Nanti untuk Bu Kathryn, this is my book. Agak tebal ya. Agak tebal, tapi ini 15 years Bu Kathryn. Thank you for your support writing the ecology of Sumatra. It's very important book.
Well, I'm the author only of Nusa Tenggara and Maluku.
Nusa Tenggara and Maluku. Oh yeah, that's my place also, Nusa Tenggara. Pak moderator, izin ya saya live. Another Zoom is waiting Bu Kathryn. Makasih Pak Doli, semua teman-teman dosen dan semuanya. Nomor HP saya sudah ada di situ. Assalamualaikum.
Makasih banyak Pak Bir.
Makasih.
Oke, demikian Bapak dan Ibu jawaban yang telah diberikan oleh Pak Dirjen, Pak Wiratno terhadap pertanyaan yang Bapak dan Ibu berikan. Kita masih ada waktu 10 menit lagi. Kalau misalnya ada pertanyaan untuk Ibu Kathryn, silakan. Kalau ada yang mau bertanya. Tapi kalau tidak ada, saya mungkin akan menanyakan kepada Ibu Kathryn. So, Prof. Kathryn,
Yes.
based on your experience, dari more than almost 20 years in Southeast Asia, what is your opinion about the restoration ecosystem that's already done in Indonesia, as already mentioned by Pak Wiratno before?
Yes. Oh, you put me on the spot.
It's okay. It's nice to Kathryn. Please.
Well, of course, I worked and lived in Indonesia, I'm afraid, a long time ago. I have been back a few times, the last time in the end of 2019, which was lucky planning, wasn't it? Where I was able to visit several islands and see quite a lot of programs. Things have improved enormously in many ways since I worked here over 20 years ago across islands, and your communications, your resources, and your knowledge, your local partnerships, your local support obviously have all grown. But so too has the pressure from that shall we say, globally unsustainable consumption and production. And it is a global problem. It isn't that of one country, but it is a problem which in the Europe and in America particularly we are looking at, because we know that our consumption is unsustainable if we are to have a more equitable global community. So I think from what I'm hearing and some of the things I saw today, but also when I was here with Pak Dolly, enormous resources and activity that you need to share more widely, which is why I talked about these global platforms, which allow experts and communities from different countries to share what they're doing, to provide what works so that other people can take that up. And you have a lot to contribute to the improvement of other communities, other people in other countries, as well as learning as well. And the biggest challenge, I think, or one of the biggest challenges for you is the scale of some of the restoration programs. When you look at many of the programs for restoration, they are, as we have talked about, very complicated and very slow developments of partnerships. Partnerships between the government, between local, regional government, and of very diverse local communities. And they are successful, but they take a long time. And when you're dealing with, as I talked about in Wales, of 90,000 hectares, a 60-hectare programme to restore peatland in Wales costs nearly £1 million. And you have several million hectares of peatland to restore. You cannot spend several million pounds, many millions of pounds, restoring this in the way that we are approaching restoration at the moment. So there is a lot of innovation that is required. And I think that's where sharing our ideas across these platforms would be really valuable. No rapid solution, I'm afraid. You're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Kathryn. I'm sorry. Your answer is also in line with question here that's right by Ibu Dian. She asked about how to synchronize among the other institutions with the government regarding to conservation. So you already mentioned that we need a kind of the coalition, we need a kind of the collaboration among the stakeholders with the government and also with the local people for the success of the ecosystem restoration. Okay.
One thing perhaps would be useful, I did mention it, but perhaps we need to repeat it. In some areas, restoration can be primarily a technological solution, but in most cases it's very interdisciplinary, and the development of much more interdisciplinary work in universities between the ecologists, between the engineers, and between the social scientists is really, really important.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathryn. I think all of us agree with you. Is that conservation is not kind of the science perspective. It is also need a work of the social science to empowering local people to make a good perception perspective on the regarding the value of the ecosystem, and also the understanding natural resource. It is as a capital for our development. So we cannot destroy the environmental, because it will be disturbing the sustainability of the ecosystem or environmental, like that. Okay. Terima kasih banyak. Thank you very much, Prof. Kathryn, for your time. Join with us from Swansea University in UK. Bapak dan Ibu, peserta webinar, kita telah sampai di ujung untuk sesi pertama ini. Kemudian masih ada pertanyaan dari ini. Pak Arnati Yusmur, Samuel Metro. Ibu Kathryn, salah satu indikator dalam melihat keberhasilan restorasi ekosistem adalah keseimbangan hayati. Apa parameter yang bisa menjadi parameter untuk keseimbangan hayati secara ekologi? So, Ibu Kathryn, there is another question for you. You already mentioned about the indicator for the success of the restoration ecosystem is the stability of the natural resource. How we can measure keseimbangan hayati ini, saya bahasa Inggrisnya what is in English? Keseimbangan, the balance, not equal, or a natural process of the ecosystem. What is the parameter for the successful of the restoration ecosystem?
Ecological balance, Pak Wilson.
Ecological balance. Thank you, Prof. Yeah. How we can measure the ecological balance as a parameter of the successful of the restoration ecosystem?
Yes. If I understand correctly here, the question is about how do we know if we've been successful, basically, in restoring the ecosystem services for the full functioning of an ecosystem. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Yes, okay. So I think my first understanding was about how do you know, how can you evaluate success? And in that respect, there are many examples of good evaluation programs of this interdisciplinary nature. But we are still learning in many ways through research of what it is when we talk about a fully functioning ecosystem. What are the indicators of a fully functioning ecosystem. And for some of the services, it's relatively easy to measure. But for many others, it's still very challenging. And so the science is also an art of ecological restoration. And we must learn to reiterate and try new approaches, but also to be fairly pragmatic, depending on the challenge. So what I'm saying is that it is actually really difficult in a very scientific way to measure success of an ecosystem restoration program. But you can design more pragmatic measures depending on the individual situation. But I think also that part of the problem is one of the challenges is the scale, and I'll go back again to the scale of the challenges you have, and the approaches that we have that have been demonstrated as successful in many parts of Indonesia and many parts of the world. But they are small scale compared to the challenges ahead over the next decade. So I can give you examples, I gave examples today, of peatland restoration in Wales on a 60-hectare site. Only 60 hectares. And we have 90,000 to look at. And how many million hectares of restoration do you need to carry out and you have said you will carry out in Indonesia? You cannot carry that restoration out to that scale using the approaches that we have already honed to success on a small scale, because it's just not practical, and we won't be able to do it in the time that you have set yourself. So there is a lot of interest in looking at the new techniques, and one of them is the rewilding. This stepping back from an area and letting it sort itself out. However, and we have examples of that in England on small estates where people have just stepped back and said, okay, the restoration of this site is important for services. We don't have dependent communities on those sites, and so we can step back and let those rehabilitate themselves. But how you're going to do that, how you're going to step back and let large-scale areas rehabilitate slowly on their own, whilst you've also got dependent communities, is a big challenge. And that's why I think you need to start engaging much more than you already are in that global conversation on these platforms. I hope that helps a little bit. Well, it probably doesn't help. It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge. And I think I would be really interested in seeing a lot more examples of what you're doing being shared more widely, so that we can have those discussions of how you're going to work, how have you been tackling these large-scale programs.
Oke, terima kasih. Thank you very much, Prof. Kathryn. Ini penjelasannya sangat panjang lebar dan saya rasa menjawab apa yang kita tanyakan tadi. Bapak dan Ibu, mohon maaf untuk pertanyaan yang masih ada karena keterbatasan waktu. Mungkin untuk sesi ini kita cukupkan sampai di sini. Pertanyaan Bapak dan Ibu nanti akan disampaikan oleh panitia kepada narasumber. Terima kasih banyak kepada Pak Wiratno, beliau sudah tidak bersama kita. Juga kepada Ibu Kathryn, thank you very much Ibu Kathryn for your time and your knowledge you share with us. It is nice to talk with you directly. Selama ini we previously we only read your book, but today many people can meet with you directly and discuss with you. Sekali lagi mungkin untuk ini kita bisa menyampaikan apresiasi kepada narasumber kita. Silakan tepuk tangan di tempat masing-masing. Demikian saja waktu kami kembalikan kepada MC. Silakan Pak Dadang.